Prime Field.
All right, quick question. What if UConn's biggest advantage, the thing that makes them feel unfair, is also the one moment every opponent circles like blood in the water? Because right now, UConn's bench isn't a hold the fort unit. It's a depth charge. It hits the game, and the score explodes. But there's a catch. There's a second quarter window, that first mixed lineup where UConn can look human, sloppy, out of sync. And Notre Dame? They're the exact type of opponent that will try to live in that window. So tonight, we're tracking one thing. Can UConn's bench win the game without giving Notre Dame an opening? Let's start with the headline. UConn's reserves are turning good nights into avalanches. Against Villanova, all 11 Huskies who played scored, and the bench dropped 39 points. And that's not a bench. That's a second offense. And here's the part that should scare Notre Dame the most. Fourth quarter. UConn's bench outscored Villanova's bench 23-6 in the final frame. Think about what that means. Most teams get to the fourth quarter praying, just survive the bench minutes. UConn gets to the fourth quarter like perfect. Time to sprint while your legs are gone. So the first question tonight isn't can UConn build a lead? It's when UConn gets a lead, how fast can the bench turn it into a blowout? And it's not just volume, it's not empty points, it's efficiency. Here's what makes this depth different. The bench isn't surviving on chaos. They're finishing plays. UConn shot 54.9% from the field versus Villanova and 58.1% versus Creighton. And you can't tell the story without Blanca Quiñonez. 13 points on 5 for 9 versus Villanova, 15 points on 7 for 11 versus Creighton. That's not nice for a freshman. That's starter-level shot-making. And in the Creighton game, it wasn't just Blanca. 4 different reserves shot 50% or better. So if you're Notre Dame, what's the game plan? Because normally you say, when the stars sit, we make our run. But what if the stars sit and the bench keeps hitting you with 50% shooting? And that's how teams break. Transition. And once the opponent starts breaking, do it too. UConn's depth does something that doesn't show up in one highlight. It wears you down. This is the silent killer. Fresh legs versus tired decision-making. Against Villanova, UConn came out of halftime with a 12-0 run. Game over, door locked. And Villanova's top scorer, Jasmine Basco, 8 points. All in the first half, 0 after the break. That's not just defense. That's the effect of playing against a team that keeps sending waves at you. And we saw the same theme against Creighton. UConn hits on halftime up 54-21. So by the time other teams are hoping to settle in, UConn is already rotating, pressing, running, and stacking points. Notre Dame starters can be tough, but can they be tough when UConn is rolling out production from everybody? Which brings us to the scariest idea in this whole matchup. UConn might have a 6th starter. This is where the bench story becomes a rotation story, because Blanca isn't just a spark, she's a closing option. Back-to-back double digits off the bench, over 10 points per game as a reserve. And Gino Auriemma didn't hint. He basically stamped it. He said, Blanca probably has the most impact on the game, other than what Sarah, Strong, and AZ Fudd are doing. That's the key line. Because it means UConn doesn't just have depth, they have flexibility. If a starter is off, and if a matchup is wrong, if spacing is better with Blanca, Gino can close with a bench player and not blink. So tonight, keep an eye on the late game lineup possibilities, even if the game isn't close, because that's how championship rotations form. You don't earn closing trust in March. You earn it in January, in the minutes that matter, when the coach decides who gets the last stretch. Transition. Now, all of that sounds unstoppable. And most of the time, it is. But there's one moment where UConn can give opponents oxygen, the second quarter. Here's the twist. Against Villanova, UConn dominates the first quarter 26-8. They win the third 31-17. But the second quarter, 19-19, a stalemate. And the timing tells the whole story. That's when UConn starts mixing bench players with starters in non-standard combinations. And that's where the lineup friction shows up. In that second quarter, UConn committed 5 turnovers. Even worse, when the subs came in, they coughed up 4 turnovers in just over 3 minutes, and Villanova ripped off a 10-0 run. So what is that? It's not a talent problem. It's chemistry, timing, spacing, roles, when you go small, when you go guard heavy, when you stack young players together. For a few possessions, the ball can stick. The reads can be late, the passes can float. And if you're Notre Dame, you're thinking, okay, we may not win 40 minutes. But can we win that 6-minute stretch where UConn is figuring out the blend? So what's the fix? It's not play your starters 40. It's about staggering the anchors. This is where coaching chess comes in. When UConn hit turbulence against Villanova, it took one veteran sequence to erase the danger. KK Arnold re-enters. She attacks for a layup to stop the drought, then a steal, then she finds AZ Fudd for a 3. And suddenly the lead balloons back and the threat is over. That's your blueprint. If the mixed lineup gets shaky, you keep an anchor on the floor, Fudd or Strong, someone who can command spacing and punish mistakes immediately. So against Notre Dame, watch for that substitution pattern. Do we see Gino stagger it so one star is always on? Because if he does, that second quarter mortal stretch might disappear. And if it disappears, then you're not just facing UConn starting 5. You're facing UConn for 40 minutes. Now let's add the layer that makes this whole bench discussion even nastier for opponents. Spacing gravity. 2 games ago, UConn hit 13 3-pointers. And when you do that, defenders don't just close out. They panic close out. They start playing like they're attached to the arc with a rope. Like they have to glue themselves to shooters because one step inside is a dagger. And that changes everything about the matchup. Because when defenders are glued to the 3-point line, driving lanes get wider. Help defense arrives later. Rotations get longer and messier, and every extra pass becomes a layup or an open kickout. So here's the real question. What happens when UConn's bench checks in? And the defense can't relax. Usually teams think, okay, second unit left, we can shrink the floor. Not against UConn. Not when the scouting report says stay hugged to the arc or you're giving up a 3. And now your bench unit is playing in a game that feels like it's on fast forward, because every defensive mistake is either a wide open 3 or a straight line drive created by overhelping on that 3, which ties back to that 6th starter idea with Blanca Quiñonez. If you're glued to shooters, you can't load up on one scorer. You can't cheat. UConn's depth plus 3-point volume forces you to defend everybody, and that is exactly how leads turn from comfortable to cruel. And once teams are sprinting from the arc to the rim for 40 minutes, that's when the fatigue shows up by mid-third quarter. So here's the pregame truth. Bench scoring differential will likely decide this. We've seen UConn's reserves bury teams versus Villanova. Bench advantage 39-16 versus Creighton. Bench advantage 38-7. If UConn wins the bench battle by 25 plus again, Notre Dame starters could be running on fumes by the second half. But if Notre Dame can do 2 things, get real bench production of their own, and attack that early second quarter lineup friction window, then this gets a lot more interesting. So my 2 trackers tonight, bench points, and the second quarter scoreline. All right, your turn. Do you think Gino should stagger it so Fudd or Strong is on the floor at all times? Or should he keep testing those bench-heavy lineups to build chemistry for March? Drop your answer in the comments, and tell me what you're watching in that second quarter.
Prime Field